And I actually manage analytics resources for a couple other functions also. I have a team of about 11 folks that I'm responsible for. Not all of them report directly to me, and I think Carlos has a question about that later on about our team structure. I came into this role about a year ago. Prior to that, I was working in analytics roles focused on manufacturing. And what I really found when I was in operations is that the person that needs the data to know what decision to make is the guy or the person that's there at 3 a.m. on Saturday, right? Like the salaried management staff is not there at 3 a.m. on Saturday. So if you can design dashboard or an analytic or a model that tells people how to make good decisions all the time, and present it in such a way that anybody can use it and understand it, then you can get your business to do what your customer needs consistently all the time. So I really started from that manufacturing operations background, getting into data, seeing the power of data, understanding, hey, how do I get the right information to the right person at the right time for them to take action on that data? In the really early days, we had a tool called Splunk, which is like a log analysis and monitoring tool. We actually used it on all of our process data. So industrial data, think like IoT, think sensors. Whenever you hear IoT, just think a PLC connected to the internet. Because for most intents and purposes, that's really what it is. It's whatever controls your line knows how fast is this motor turning, what temperature is this sensor, how fast is this thing spinning, at what rate is everything going on. And modern PLCs can report all that data elsewhere so that you can look historically back at what has your process been doing, how has it been doing, what was it doing when it produced this off quality or out of spec process. So I really got my data chops with time series data, very complex data, but alongside a deep understanding of the data I was looking at because I was embedded in that process.
Nice. In terms of your or education, Erica, what's your formation? What was your BA on, for example?
I went to Olin College of Engineering, which is in Needham, Massachusetts. It's kind of a non-traditional engineering school, so everyone codes. You do a lot of project-based learning. My degree was in materials engineering, and I actually went to Northwestern after Olin to start a PhD program. And I realized that being in the lab doesn't make me happy. People make me happy. Helping people be better makes me happy. So I relocated from Northwestern to Chattanooga and started my career with Shaw.
Awesome. And was that like I would say migration from the lab to the real world and to actually like being around people and doing these kind of projects kind of natural, or was it what was it hard? I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. So if you're in a research lab, your job is to advance the frontier of knowledge in some way or another, right? So your product, the thing that you're making, is really a paper that proves that you have done that, right? Academics, or at least the experience that I had, was really not applied. The difference in what I do working for Shaw is, hey, we're providing our one of our mottos is, great people, great products, great service always. So if we are providing a great service to our customers, we're having a beneficial effect in our community, we're creating job security for our associates. We're a very large domestic manufacturer. And like a lot of other manufacturing jobs, they pay pretty well at an hourly rate. We train our own electricians and mechanics because that's a skill set that's really hard to hire for in the region where we are. So you can start with us as an operator and get retrained to be a mechanic or an electrician. And those maintenance jobs are really, really high paying. And a lot of them are very high tech now with increasing automation and robotics in both manufacturing and in warehousing, which is more on the supply chain side. So, business is very focused on outcomes and results. But the culture at the company I'm at is one where we also care very much about people and treating our people well, growing our people, developing our people, taking care of our people. So it's been a lot more satisfying to me to be part of a team.
Awesome. Uh, Erica, everybody talks, about ML in sales, marketing, etc. I think like the basic applications, but supply chain is just like a huge opportunity. I was actually talking to an expert in this matter not so long ago, and he was telling me that there were so many missed opportunities and so much to explore that a company that would focus on actual supply chain and ML would like really make it. Uh, what are your thoughts on that, and what's like the state of the space at this point in terms of machine learning and analytics?
So I think it depends a lot on what kind of company you're talking about and what is their scope, and to a large degree how old they are, right? So you're like Warby Parker's, your Rent the Runway, your Stitch Fix, those are all logistics companies. They are making products or sourcing products. Just lost. Oh crap. I don't know if you guys can still hear me, but my screen just went black. So
yeah, we can.
Okay, great. So those companies that are, your Warby Parkers, your Stitch Fix, they started in the digital age. They started knowing about machine learning, knowing about AI. When they built all their software, they built it with collecting the data to improve the process in mind. A company that's more mature, they have to justify and spend money to climb up that digital curve, the digitization curve, to even be able to do AI and ML. So if you're a procurement organization, I read somewhere that 50% of procurement organizations still primarily work out of Microsoft Excel or Excel-like platforms. There's a lot of like email, like mailing invoices, mailing bill of ladings back and forth, manually keying POs from paper into systems. If you're doing all that kind of stuff, if you have a lot of humans involved in the workflow that makes your data, it's going to produce a lot of variability that's going to make machine learning really, really hard. Just because there's going to be gaps in the data that don't really make sense that were caused by something that happened in the real world.
Yeah.
And that's something we see in manufacturing too, right? Like anytime you're going to do any sort of machine learning or AI project, you need to do it in collaboration with somebody who understands how that data is produced and then how that business can learn from it and apply it to outcomes. So I think it really depends, and some companies are farther along than others. Somebody like Amazon has very sophisticated AI and machine learning in all areas of their business, right? They are selling it to other people through AWS and their platforms there. So that's going to be a little different than like a 3PL, like a third-party logistics company that's been around for a very, very long time and may not have a fully digitized business yet. Yeah. So I say all that to say, like, supply chain's not necessarily monolithic. The other thing that's going on is, you've got the hype cycle and things being really highly hyped. And AI and machine learning is one of those things that's been hyped for a very long time. So you have two trends going on. You have some people overselling what the technology can do. Then you have some companies who are hearing all that overselling, and they may actually be farther up that maturity curve than they think they are. But because you're hearing all these buzz about, like systems that learn on their own and take action without you, totally black box type models, most businesses are not going to be comfortable monitoring and deploying something like that. And they're certainly not going to start there.
Yeah, I was remembering one day I was talking to one guy, and he was like, so are you going to talk to me about true AI, or is it the mumbo jumbo AI everybody's talking about? So yeah, there's a ton of hype out there. But on the other hand, you start seeing some very interesting use cases. For example, one client of ours, he's in Australia, and what they are doing is they are a nonprofit organization, and they're tracking the health of fish in this like fish farms, right? And the way they're doing that is measuring like water temperature, like acidity of the water, weather, among others, to try to improve the output and the volume in the supply chain. So they're using all of these machine learning algorithms to try to predict how to improve the output of the supply chain with all of these algorithms and ML models. So it's pretty interesting, and I bet it's an industry that is growing and growing in terms of machine learning. So a ton of interesting stuff there. Just a reminder for everybody, there's the AMA discussion channel. Just drop your questions there, and more than happy to pass them to Erica so that she can answer them. Just going into my next question, Erica, here. What are some of the most interesting things in terms of AI for supply chain? Like in your case, any use cases, any successes that you can share with the audience here?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's different kinds, and it's kind of interesting that fish farm example you gave. There's different kinds of uses of AI in business, right? So, am I going to expect okay, somebody's going to look at this model and then they're going to understand something or change their strategy or go do something, but the model itself is not connected to anything that might change a business process, right? And then on the other side, you have models like our inventory assignment algorithm, right? So there's an algorithm that tries to optimize which inventory is assigned to which order so that they can be processed and filled. And it has configurable pieces to it. It's a proprietary system. So that's one thing you definitely see in supply chains is systems that serve a specific purpose within that supply chain process. You're going to plan, you're going to source, you're going to move your product from your supplier to you or from where it's manufactured to your customer, and then you're going to deliver it and collect your money from your customer. Another really common supply chain application is forecasting and forecast models, right? My husband built a deck for his parents this year, and the COVID crisis meant that everyone's trying to build stuff at their houses. Yeah. So regular 2x6s became so expensive that you were only going to pay a couple more dollars to get a Trex board. It's like plastic covered wood that would last like 30 years. Well, because the order volume went up like 3 times normal, way above what Trex had forecasted, it had delays in delivering product to their customers. Supply chains are made up of physical entities, so they don't scale infinitely. So whether Trex is like producing that product or whether they're sourcing it from somebody else and then reselling it under the Trex brand, if the forecast is off by a factor of 3, there is no way you are going to catch that up. Some businesses will have really complex forecasting, especially for like new product introductions or like the hardest to forecast. If I've never sold it before, don't have any historical data on how that product might perform, it's really hard to forecast those accurately. That's an area of supply chain where there's a lot of vendors that sell software platforms that perform that forecasting function for supply chain entities.
Got it. So it is mostly done by providers instead of just like building it in-house, right? Because one of the things that I was thinking and that I thought all of these companies were doing were just like, hey, let's just run different models and let's try to get the accuracy that we want. But it seems that companies don't want to take that risk, and they want to go with established vendors that get a fairly accurate. Is that correct?
I think it's going to depend a lot on the use case and on where that company might be in the maturity journey.
Yeah.
So I know of a lot of different use cases within Shaw that I would love to see us deploy a fully productionized, like AI model, totally connected up to everything else. The other thing to think of is in a lot of business cases, you just don't need that level of complexity to solve the level of problem you have.
Yeah.
So I always tell my developers, my analysts, like if a Pareto chart is going to solve your problem appropriately, you do not need a machine learning model. And if people won't take action on a Pareto chart, they sure as hell are not going to take action on your black box model. Yeah. Sorry for the profanity. It's Friday. But, I think some of the questions you have for me later, we'll get more into this. But, supply chain can be a very mature industry. And one where there's certain comfort with the way things have been done. It's a very relationship-driven business. So you have to think about, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Why is it that you truly need to solve it with machine learning and find the best use case where a model can truly perform that job better than whatever business process is currently in place?
Got it. Perfect. And actually, I don't know if we've been explicit, but if you guys are interested in flooring, I think Shaw has some great products out there. So take a look at their website as well. And I think you'll like their products. So yeah, like I don't think we've talked as much about Shaw, but I think we'll get to that. In terms of on the team, Erica, how is that team organized? How do you guys deliver to the different business units? Because even in the more like traditional divisions, like again sales or marketing, there's always this challenge of how can we efficiently deploy to the different business applications or different business units. So in your case, where again this might impact, and we were actually working with a company that wanted to reduce, for example, waste, and they were producing packaging for these huge companies like P&G and Unilever. They needed to go to the operator level, right? Like, okay, operator, this is when you need to run the machines. This is the different things that you need to do to set up the machine and be just more efficient. How is that communication with the different teams within your team, and how all that works? Can you shed some light on that?
Sure. So our role is primarily, for my group, would primarily be like a centralized analytics role. Mm-hmm. So we're going to work on, we have different kind of sub teams within the team that focus on different areas. So I have 3 analysts that work on production planning and global sourcing, and they're focused on apps and analytics that work for that user group. I have 2 analysts focused on manufacturing, 2 on customer service, 3 in logistics, and then 1 that handles financial services and risk. Because their data is kind of slower moving. It's not as operationally focused. So the scope is 2 different areas, but it's not quite as demanding. As far as like day-to-day operations within a facility, like a lot of other manufacturing companies, we have a strong Lean Six Sigma background. So in your example of the waste, you could do different types of lean methodologies. You could do a Kaizen, which is kind of like a team activity where you bring in some operators, you bring in some supervisors, you bring in some maintenance guys, some planning people for that facility. And you'd say, all right, what are all the ways we can make waste? Which is the biggest opportunity? How do we know it's the biggest opportunity? Can we pull in any data? What procedures should we change? And then you'd go through, some experimentation and trial to like run that new stuff out. Mm-hmm. The other lean method would be Lean Six Sigma, which would say, okay, pick a primary measure and then a secondary measure. Like if I improve my waste by 10%, my productivity also drops by 10%. That's probably not good for my business. And that'll follow a process that's actually really similar to like a machine learning or an AI project workflow. Mm-hmm. You're going to define, measure, analyze, improve, control. The difference is with a Lean Six Sigma project, you're counting on those operators or those business processes or those people to change their minds and act differently, go with your new way of doing things. And it turns out it's a lot harder to change people than computers, right? Like for better or for worse, a computer will do exactly what I program it to do, for the most part. Neural nets and deep learning and all that aside, computers follow instructions pretty well, much better than humans.
Interesting. So just to go deeper there, Erica, So for example, and correct me if I understood wrongly here, but so you would put together a team, like let's say with an agile methodology, that, and for example, let's say the finance folks that you have in your team, and they work with the specific division on a specific project, right? So they work on that project. They put it into production. Once is in production, what happens after that? Because, for example, the team, after they deploy, I bet, it focuses on other projects. So what happens, for example, is if there's an iteration, what happens if something needs to be changed? What happens if, hey, after 3 months, the project didn't work? How that works, because resources are limited, and the team needs to keep moving. So how that works?
Yeah. So on my team, we use sprint planning.
Mm-hmm.
So we will lock in a 2-week block of work, and we write user stories. We look at business cases. We have my group is housed within a group that performs a function kind of like product management, but internally.
Mm-hmm.
So my boss is responsible for ensuring that all of the software that all of the business divisions he supports uses do what they're supposed to do. It's very akin to what a product manager would do in terms of like keeping track of a technology roadmap, making sure that business needs are met by projects that are being done, making sure there's a good business case, all of that sort of stuff. So we lean on the director over that area to help the analytics team prioritize, because that director has a great relationship with the business leader.
Okay.
My organization is really highly matrixed, which is something that works well when it's working really well.
Yeah.
We're about a year old now, so we're getting most of the like transition blues and bumps and bruises out of things. For my team that's been sprint planning the longest, we actually made a change to our schedule about 4 months ago. We used to do 2-week sprints, and we demo.
Yeah.
The demos are super effective. We get a ton of business feedback. We get a ton of engagement. We get to kind of teach gently in those demos. So we'll make sure to remind people about the features of the tool. We'll say like, hey, you can use these comments to send each other emails, and you can attach the dashboard right to the email so you can see what's going on, or hey, add your favorites so you don't have to bookmark everything. We primarily use Tableau as our visualization platform. So what we found, though, was we were getting all this useful feedback on the demo, but then we had already started the next sprint. And so the developers were in this frustration cycle where, like, I've already locked down all my sprint tasks, but they asked me for this one thing that would just take me 2 minutes to fix. Yeah. And they were kind of feeling like I'm always rolling and I never get to stop and I never get to fix what I want.
Yeah.
And on my team, we do retrospectives. We have a really candid culture. I tell them all the time, I'm like, if you ask me for an opinion, you will get one. So sometimes you need to just trust your gut and not ask for my opinion, because if you ask, I'm going to have one. But in this case, we sat down together and we talked as a team about like, hey, what's working, what's not working, what do we want? And what we ended up doing was adding what we call a sync week. So the sprint ends with the demo from our development environment. So when we demo, we get all this feedback. Hey, change this label, move this thing, this part's confusing. And then the developers have a week to both fix that kind of feedback, clean up support tasks, document stuff, pay off technical debt. Like, hey, maybe they built the data model a little rushed for the demo and they want to go back and clean something up. They have time to do that in that week. And then we also prepare for the upcoming round of sprint tasks. So if we've got to meet with somebody, get more info about what they need to scope the work, we'll do things like that in that sync week. And that's working pretty well for the team that's doing it. The other team is newer to sprints. And so we're still on that 2-week cadence for a little while longer until we see a little more participation in the demos. Right now, it's just the people we built something for showing up. Whereas our planning area, to give you a sense of the size, the organization's about 150 people in the planning group. And we also invite our enterprise IT team and some other folks. And we'll typically have like 25 to 30 people on that call week in, week out when we do our demos.
Wow. And actually, the more I talk with different companies, I think that structure of having like specialized or not specialized, I would say like people focused on the specific different units and then running sprints for each one of those units um, is fairly common. Like it's getting more and more and more common because at the beginning there was a lot of discussions on like where should the analytics team leave, right? Or where should the ML team leave? Should it be part of sales or marketing, or should it be like independent? So I think the more I talk to companies, this structure that is centralized, but at the same time that having specialized or people focused on the specific areas like it makes sense, and it seems to be working pretty well. Um,
I
shift,
mean, I think
yeah,
I'll just comment on that real
yeah.
quick. What we call it, like I have my team of 11, I have 5 direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have 6 that dotted line to me, and I'm expected to keep them aligned to the strategy for the supply chain and then the overall like technical execution and methods that we're using, right? So I like develop them technically, and I make sure they're building things in a sensible way. My boss calls those the matrix. And then we have what he calls the matrix, which is there are embedded AI developers that are out there that report up through the business. And we've kind of used like a COE type model where I'm connected to them. I'm aware of what they're doing. I'm not their boss. They come to me for help with IT or with platform type issues. I think you have to have somebody who can see the whole picture end to end.
Yep.
And the reason I say that is if you don't, you'll have sales develop one segmentation model and marketing will develop a completely different one. And all of a sudden they can't talk about sales numbers because they add them up differently. Or your demand planning group looks at historical orders one way and doesn't count a certain type of order as demand, and then your sales group does, and their numbers never line up.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Or if you don't have good master data initiatives, you won't be able to segment things by the right measures. So I do think you need someone focused on the whole picture, but I'm not going to lie. I mean, the focus of my centralized group comes at a sacrifice for speed. My planning director knows what the 3 things, the business leader of that function, he knows the top 3 things my team is working on. And if I leapfrog something to the top of the list that he doesn't want there, I will hear about it. So you have to be important to get my team's help, which is kind of a bummer because some of those like more innovative, close to the business, faster moving ideas, if you don't have an amazing business case, it's hard to get my support for them, but that doesn't mean they don't have value. So
yeah, I think
just something to think.
Yeah.
I've been the embedded resource and now I manage a team of the central resources. So I've kind of seen it from both sides.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges at this point, right? But yeah, actually, we have a question on the AMA discussion. We have 2, but I'm just gonna read one of them. Is from Endemir, and he asks, when you have a black box model, how do you convince the decision makers, or do you always try to focus on interpretability?
I think it would depend on the situation. So if you had, let's say you have a certain business unit and they're trying to predict whether an order will be late or on time. Right now you might have people that would be able to make you in that business a list of like, hey, here's why we miss orders. Like the truck doesn't show up on time. The shipment from the supplier is late. Manufacturing had mechanical issues and didn't make it on time, or whatever that list is. If you build an interpretable model first and can gain confidence in predictions made by that model, that's something that people can see and understand, right? So something like a decision tree. You can sketch that out on a slide and somebody can follow your logic and understand it. A lot of business leaders they won't tell you they're intimidated, but they may be intimidated if you're like, okay, so there's this neural net, right? And you just feed stuff into these nodes, and then I doubled the nodes or whatever, you may lose them a little bit. So I think your best chance is to get an interpretable model succeeding first. And then you would be able to show, okay, we did this interpretable model. Now we're feeding the same data that everybody already trusts, that everybody knows is predictive, that everybody believes in. The data quality is good. Hey, now we're feeding it into this other type of model, and this is better, right? That's how I think you would get somebody there. We have some applications of what you might consider more black box models that people have experimented with within our company. It's really going to depend on that leader's tolerance for risk, I think.
Mm. And also translates in being really good at making presentations, right? And like make them really simple and that people understand, and that again that they can follow your logic, because sometimes as you mentioned, like it can get too technical, and that's when you lose people. um so yeah.
The biggest thing I've seen on that one, Carlos, is like walking an example end to end. Like, okay, here's this order, here's a specific order number, like here's all the things that happen to it, and relate that to the terms. You really need to speak someone else's language, not your own language. So don't call the column what it's called in the database or whatever you renamed it in your model as you were doing feature engineering. Call it what the business person calls it, and you will build trust.
Yeah.
The other thing I've seen, and this is probably more applicable to like mature businesses, but if you're giving examples, like give examples that make numerical sense, that would pass a smell test. So let's say in your like our imaginary order prediction scenario, I want to know if an order is going to get there late or a delivery is going to get there late. If only 10% of deliveries are late, don't say the number's 40, especially if 40 makes the person you're talking to look bad, right? If anything, if you're going to say a fake number, err on the side of saying a fake number that makes somebody look good compared to their current performance.
That's great, and it makes sense. Actually, Erica, here's another question in the AMA discussion group channel. Sorry, which actually reminded me of something that I saw, but I'm just gonna read it for you. It says, "What's the best way for a mid-sized furniture company to shift from Excel to machine learning?" And this is funny because I actually somebody that's really close was showing me the other day in a similar company these amazingly complex Excel files where they had like all of their sales, all of their operations, and he was just punching numbers into these Excel files. Uh, how would you recommend that shift? Like, I'm not sure if you actually were part or lived that process in any of these companies. I'm fairly sure you did. Do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, so since spreadsheets are great, I'm not a spreadsheet hater. I quite like spreadsheets when I need to get work done, right? It's terrible when people use them instead of whatever I've built. Spreadsheets are a bad production system. That's really the answer to get across, right? They're prone to errors and mistakes. Like I saw recently on Twitter, they renamed human genes because spreadsheets keep interpreting them as dates. So they're like, was a human date called MAR1? And the geneticists were like, listen, this is causing so many errors in papers. We're just going to rename it. So the question I would have is like, okay, why are we doing this spreadsheet process? Is there not a point of sale system that provides sales history? Is there not an inventory system that provides inventory information? So your starting point is truly an Excel spreadsheet that is running your business. I would be really realistic about what you can get done with that. There's a paper, I think it's by a woman named Kara Wu, and it's like rules for spreadsheets. And I think if you put those two things together, you can find it on Google. And it has things like, don't use color as data. So like, don't color a cell to show that this is like a risk. Have a column that says risk next to that same row. A lot of business professionals are really good at using a spreadsheet to think something out and solve a problem. Spreadsheets are pretty good at that. It's not helpful to like rail against that reality. But in the example of a company that is truly running their business off of spreadsheets, they need to get some enterprise software systems in place before they should consider something like AI and ML. That's just my opinion. I mean, if you're starting with really crappy data or really data that's prone to a lot of human error, then you're not going to be able to make a meaningful prediction on top of that data in most cases anyway.
And if the case, Erica, is they do have systems in place for inventory, for sales, and but they haven't they haven't taken the next step in terms of machine learning. What's the best way to do that? Is the best way just like, hey, let's hire a head of data, or let's start with supply chain, or like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it would depend on the situation for the company. So if you have the right skill set internally, I would look at your business strategy and your business problem. So is the company profitable? Are turns on inventory where you want them to be? Can you see, like, what do you do with inventory that's been around for a really long time? Like, do you have any like 3-year-old couches sitting around your like mid-sized furniture store? So you would look at like, what is the business strategy? Where are there areas where the business is not executing in alignment with that strategy? And then in a case of a company that's low on the maturity curve, I would look for the areas where you already have good data. And I would try to be really, 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 really bullish about making the problem as simple as possible. So like, you're not going to predict the answer to life, the universe, and everything the first try. Trying to get it down to where classification or regression provides meaningful business information that's not available another way. So can I predict whether or not inventory will age out before I sell it? Can I predict based on floor traffic what sales for a store are going to be, and decide to do like targeted promotions in a certain area to get my sales goals met? Those kinds of things, depending on what the company's working on and where they're going. Other thing I would consider is vendor solutions, but I think you have to be careful. You want to choose a partner vendor or a partner consultant who's right sized for your needs and your company, so that you're picking the right partner. And when you're working with a vendor, I always like to have someone internally who knows enough about the topic that that vendor's not going to be able to take you for a ride.
And actually, that's a great point there, Erica, because I mean, your team right now, it's 11 people. But and just going deeper into this question that Melissa was asking, like for a mid-sized company saying, okay, we're just gonna start doing this. The thought of having to, okay, now I need to hire a data scientist, now a DevOps, now an MLOps, now an engineer, so that we can build the APIs and all of that stuff. It's now not just a small project. It turned out into a huge project, which again is part of the problem that Gartner has been identifying, which is, hey, this is costly, this takes time. What's your take on that? What's your opinion? How can just a company like this start? You spoke about vendors. Is that the best way? Like having a person that will just champion a project and getting a vendor to just like try to show that these things work, or how do you go about it?
And honestly, if you take the criteria of like, okay, I'm a mid-sized furniture company, my BI system is entirely in Excel. Most reporting is still pretty manual. And I have some systems, like I have a point of sale system, I have an inventory system. Maybe people are like running reports out of those systems and then typing that into spreadsheets, and that's how information is flowing around that company. They don't need AI and ML yet. They need like 5 awesome analysts that are going to build a really good basic descriptive and diagnostic analytics stack. Because if you can't diagnose and describe, you really can't do the next layers up, right? Like prescribe and predict. So, and I would choose those analysts carefully And I would try to have them as much as possible. I've seen analyst jobs where Python is a requirement or R is a requirement for a job titled data analyst. So I would look for that kind of analyst, like someone who is going to want to keep moving up that maturity curve, maybe like a boot camp data scientist grad. Although they might not have the right SQL foundation for true analyst work. But I don't think I would advise that company to start with AI or ML. You got to get the basics right first before you start moving up that maturity curve.
Good point.
You need some level of foundation. You don't have to have perfect at the base before you can do anything next level. But you got to have something other than Excel, I think. You could probably find people who disagree with me on that.
Yeah, good point. And again, I want to be mindful of your time. Just two quick more questions, Erica, here. And the first one, I wanted to, like, listening to you, and you were talking about R, Python. What's your stack? Are you working locally, or are you using a vendor? Are you like, how do you go about that one?
Sure. Yeah. So data at Shaw is more than just my team.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have data scientists within the company. We're looking at expanding that capability within our team. We have an enterprise data warehouse. We have data in flight, event-driven, like transaction data, that kind of thing. So it's kind of this mix of like more structured data that might come out of a warehouse, and then transactional event data that's like beating heart of the supply chain, right? Most of my analysts are going to be working primarily with SQL and Tableau to get those sources of data modeled in such a way that they solve business problems, answer questions, provide insights, explain trends, find drivers, find exceptions, so that those exceptions can be managed. And then we are also in the process of deepening our Python skill set. So in my direct team, we had, I think, three people that already had Python and one that had some limited R experience. And so we're all working together on deepening our Python experience now.
So if you want to run a linear regression, let's say, would you do it locally on Python and then like sending the results or the output into Tableau?
Depends on the situation and who's working on it and what they're doing. So we have some options for like running notebooks in the cloud if you need more like firepower to be able to run the analysis you're doing. Some of the more like ad hoc, like the type of analysis we talked about where you're going to do an analysis, get an answer, and present it to somebody who's then going to think on it or digest it and then make a decision. A lot of that kind of stuff is happening locally on people's computers still.
Got it.
We actually have a pretty active internal meetup group for data scientists and analysts that's collaborative. So anyone who's interested can come. We'll have people present different work that they've done either in Python or R at that meetup.
Got it. Great. And last question here, Erica, so that I can let you enjoy your Friday, but hopefully everybody had a good time. I definitely had a great time talking to you, so thank you. But just with this last question, we're gonna go all and enjoy our weekend. Erica, what in AI gets you excited? Like any new tech out there that you're looking at? Any buzz right now that you want to share with us at this point?
So something I've been hearing about, it's interesting. You mentioned Gartner is this idea of like AI augmented business applications. So this idea that like my warehousing system would have AI inside it and I wouldn't need to know any training. My warehousing system would have these AI models built in and it would just like serve me insights, or I could like model my own data and do a prediction that way. And I think it's kind of exciting and scary at the same time. Like the other day I was in a Google sheet and Google was like, do you want me to clean up this data for you? Like made some recommendations that were like a little bit scary for the data set that I was specifically looking at. So I do really worry about like the state of data literacy and where we're going. Like I honestly feel like data culture is one of the biggest barriers that I hear from analytics practitioners, right? There's like the Twitter memes and the jokes about like, like I saw one today, like what's your least favorite part of data and why is it dashboards, right? But unless we get the business kind of caught up to what's possible and what's there for the companies that are not those digital natives, I think you're going to find that the technology's full potential will not be realized. Yeah. Now, there may be, those companies that are your digital natives, like your Amazons of the world, they may just swallow up all of the other established or smaller businesses that are performing in some of those functions. So you may see that the AI technology really makes winners and losers. Like those that are able to pick it up will make better, faster operational decisions and achieve better outcomes and better customer outcomes than companies who aren't able to leverage these technologies. So I do think we're going to see that gap expand.
That's amazing. Well, thank you again, Erica. I really appreciate your time. Hope you have a very nice weekend and end of year. Actually, let's hope that 2021 brings us much better things for everyone. So thanks again, and again, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Hope everybody else enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And see you all very soon. Thanks, Erica.
All right. Thanks for a great conversation and great questions, Carlos. I appreciate it all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey.